what you took from me. Know what you stole from me. Know what you took from me.
All right. Well, thank you so much to President Trainer and to the entire Oregon AFL-CIO, all of the delegates and all of you. It's really wonderful to be here. As Graham said, I lived in Oregon for a long time. I also worked at our wonderful labor center here, LERC, for a bunch of years. So it's really great to be back, and it's amazing to be on the coast. So thank you for having me. As Graham said, my name's Lara Skinner. I'm the Executive Director of the Climate Jobs Institute at Cornell University. We are in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell. We're a long-time, labor school that has been working with the labor movement since the 1940s. We were founded with a public service mission to support unions and to support labor relations and to make sure that we were improving the lives of working people. We're really proud of that work. And 12 years ago, we decided that we needed to be a better resource to the labor movement on climate and energy issues. We recognize we got a climate crisis. There's a lot of focus on this, and we needed to make sure that we were studying the labor and employment impacts of this transition and that we were helping unions navigate this really tough and historic transition. So really happy to be here. And as Graham said, I'm going to talk about the work that we've been doing with many of you in the room to advance what we call a pro-worker, pro-union climate agenda. So I'm excited to do that. Next slide. Let's see if I can, yep, okay, I see it right here. This is just the Climate Jobs Institute's mission. I just want to reference this quickly. We were formally established in 2023, so just a couple years ago. And our mission, as you can see here, is to guide individual states and the nation's transition to a strong, equitable, and resilient clean energy economy that creates good union jobs, protects good union jobs, also is tackling climate change at the pace and scale that we need to, and is confronting inequality and making sure that we're building a diverse and inclusive and union clean energy workforce. And so that is our mission. And we have the honor to be partners with the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, and it makes our work so much more effective. But they are more of the advocacy and action side of our work. So we do a lot of the research and policy work to think through what does a union climate jobs vision look like, in a place like Oregon. And then they really help to set up new organizations and resource and run campaigns with you all around that work. So that's just who we are. Next slide. I want to say a little bit about our origins before I move to the climate jobs work in Oregon that we've been, co-creating with many of you in the room. We started this work in New York after Hurricane Sandy in 2012. And there's a few reasons why we started the work. One was Sandy was, like a wake-up call for us. We are still rebuilding from that storm. We're still rebuilding a lot of our infrastructure from that storm. And we saw how union members were on the front lines working 24/7 during the storm and how working people were impacted and many union members. But there were other things that were going on at that time that were really important to us. One was that a lot of solar and wind projects were being built non-union at that time. And we saw the low-wage, low-quality work that was happening on those projects. And then the other thing that was happening was we were seeing a lot of our coal, gas, and nuclear plants being shut down. And a lot of union jobs eliminated in that process and the devastating impact that had on surrounding communities. And so all of that was happening, and we just thought, you know what, we can't just respond to what the climate movement is saying we should be doing on these issues. Workers will be left behind. Union members will be left behind. We have to get engaged on these issues. We have to really figure out what is happening, what needs to happen, and put together our own plan. And a plan that does deal with climate change, but also is protecting and creating good union jobs. And so Cornell was able to work with the building trades in New York and many other unions. And we went through a few-year process and we said, let's put together our own plan, a climate jobs plan for New York. And we basically recognized there's a lot of challenges in this transition, right? And we've already seen it. Many of you have probably seen it in the room, right? Seen jobs, good union jobs eliminated or are worried about that. We know there's a lot of challenges. We also know there's a lot of opportunities. This is a whole new economy that's going to be built, and we want to make sure that it's built in a fair and equitable and union way. And I would say like the most important thing that came out of that work for us in New York is that, you know, there had been a lot of attention on climate, reducing emissions, and there's a climate crisis. But what folks weren't recognizing is that we also have a crisis of inequality, and we need to be taking on both of those things at the same time. And one of the best ways to do that is making sure that you're creating good union jobs that actually sustain families and communities. So that's the work that we did. Thanks. And you can go to the next slide. So that's how we started the work. And then just to kind of fast forward to, you know, what ended up happening, we worked with a bunch of unions for a few years to put together a pro-worker, pro-union climate jobs plan. We started with a 10-point plan. Here's what we want to see happen in the building sector, energy, transportation. Here are the labor standards that need to be attached to all of the work to make sure that it's union work. And then coming out of that, the unions that were involved were like, this is great. This is a really good plan, a lot of good ideas, nice report, but we got to have an organization that can actually run campaigns and win this stuff, right? We've got to actually fight for it. And so they did. They put together an organization called Climate Jobs New York, and the first campaign and the first fight that they had was around offshore wind. Obviously, you know, different moment on offshore wind now, but back then they saw a whole new industry that was going to be built out, and they were worried about it being built out non-union. And so they said, here's how much offshore wind we want built. We want a ton of offshore wind built, and we want it all built with a PLA requirement. Later, they've gone back and they've added labor peace, they've added domestic manufacturing. And in that first campaign, it was the first state in the country where they won a PLA requirement on all offshore wind projects that would be built in New York State. Yeah, it's a huge win. It was a huge win, and it really, you know, set the stage for unions in many other states to say, hey, why haven't we done that? Why don't we have labor standards on this work that's going to be done? And then the coalition is still around, the organization is still around, and you may have heard that the current administration put a stop work order on one of the largest offshore wind projects that we were in the process of building in New York. And Climate Jobs New York, the union coalition there, ran a whole campaign and was able to beat that back, and they have restarted that work and overcame the stop work order that was on that project. Next slide. So here's just a few things I would say about why it is so important for labor to lead on climate. And I would say it's more important than ever. And we're probably going to talk more about this. We're going to have a panel and talk about this climate jobs work here in Oregon. But you know, now the game moves to the state level. What can we do to defend and move forward climate and jobs work at the state level in spite of what's happening at the federal level? And so this, you know, leadership from labor, and especially thinking about how do we make this transition in a way that really benefits working people, including creating good union jobs, is more important than ever. So, you know, the importance of labor's leadership on this, I just can't emphasize enough. We've got to be at the table and be a part of the climate and energy decisions that are being made. But more than that, we actually have to be leading the discussion on how this transition should happen. Next slide. I just wanted to show here, these are, you know, over the last several years, we have had the honor and privilege to work with coalitions of unions in a number of states around the country to build pro-worker, pro-union, job-centered climate plans. And so you can see here, we've worked with unions in 9 other states to develop these pro-union climate jobs plans. And the thing that I think is most important to take away is that these plans are very concrete. Like, what are the strategies to reduce emissions in a place, but also be protecting and creating a lot of good union jobs? What's the best way to do it? How do we pay for it? What labor standards do we need to have on the work? How many jobs is it going to create? What types of jobs, what trades will be doing this work? And so they're very concrete plans, and the coalitions that we've worked with have been able to win many of the recommendations that we've been able to work on and create with them. The next slide here shows you a map of where we've been working. So the green states are every place where there is now an active union-led climate jobs coalition. So Texas Climate Jobs Projects, there's Colorado Climate Jobs, there's the Maine Labor Climate Council. So all of the states in green already have climate jobs coalitions. A bunch of the purple states have active campaigns that they're running. Up in Wisconsin, where it's been a tough couple of decades for the labor movement. They have an agreement with the utilities now that all solar and wind and other clean energy projects will be built union. So even in places like Wisconsin, they've been able to have big wins. And the next slide just shows you some of the other, victories that I would lift up here. In Washington, there's now a Climate Jobs Washington. They secured almost $1 billion in clean energy investments for EV infrastructure, for school retrofits, and community solar. They also passed a thermal energy network bill and a zero emission school bus legislation, both with good labor standards on those bills. In Illinois, they now have a prevailing wage law on everything above rooftop solar. So that's like solar that's well below a megawatt. Those are small projects, and they have prevailing wage on that, and they have PLA agreements on anything that's above 2 megawatts. So some really important victories that they've had. The other thing I would lift up in Illinois, they also were able to secure $10 million for union pre-apprenticeship programs specifically around clean energy work. So just, these are just some examples, and I'm happy to talk more about them. Again, I'll just mention, Texas, they have a big municipal utility there in Austin. It's controlled by the city council. Texas has built 15,000 wind turbines non-union, right? A ton of work, a ton of jobs, non-union. And we did a bunch of work with them, and they said, you know what, our municipal utility is run by the city council, and they're shutting down a whole bunch of coal plants, and they're building a whole bunch of new solar and wind work, and they're doing it all non-union. We should run a campaign. We should make sure that this work is built union. These jobs are done union. And so they did. They passed legislation at the city council level, and now their municipal utility has to build all of their solar and wind projects union. So even in a place like Texas, really, really great wins. So that's just a little bit of background about how we think about this work. I think for so long, this has been such a challenge, right? To think about how we as labor get engaged in this work. A lot of concern around job loss, and there's still that concern, and we have to take that on, but we are able to take it on better when we're together and we've got a clear plan, and we can move from defense and being reactive to offense, right? We've got a plan for how to take this on and make sure that we're protecting our members and making sure that this new economy is going to be built out union. So that was a little bit on the background. You can go to the next slide. I want to move to the great work that we've been able to do with the Oregon AFL-CIO, the building trades, and many individual unions in the state, thinking about what a climate jobs plan could look like for Oregon. Just next slide, just a little bit on the process. I would just say we started working with many of you about halfway through 2024, and it's an intensive process. And like I said, these are really technical issues. It is hard to figure out okay, what has Oregon done on climate and energy issues? What more do they need to do? Where does that intersect with where we have the greatest density, where we have the best opportunity to make sure that we're building out this work union? So, luckily we can rely on you all, and through interviews and regular meetings, we can really learn from you and your insights and your experience on the ground to figure out, okay, what could a climate jobs plan and strategy look like in Oregon? So we've been going through that process, and our hope is that you all will land in a place where you've got this really nice report that lays out a climate jobs plan for Oregon, and your own climate jobs coalition here that's union led and run. Next slide. Just before I go into some of the stuff that we're thinking about, I just want to give you a little bit of background on, the challenge that we're facing here. So you can see that Oregon's emissions have been relatively stable since about 1990, a little bit up and down. What the kind of green line shows you is where Oregon's emissions need to go. And they need to steeply decline between now and 2030, which is just 5 years away, and then even further to 2040 and then 2050, where they need to be net zero. And this is really important because this is how we avoid the worst impacts of climate change, right? Like the catastrophic impacts of climate change. And we've already warmed things a little over a degree, and you all are seeing the impacts. That's been really harsh in Oregon, and those impacts get a lot worse if we're not able to make these steep reductions in emissions that we need to do. The next slide is just giving you a sense of where do your emissions come from. Most of your emissions come from transportation. I think this is important to point out because a lot of times the energy sector, how you make energy, electricity gets a lot of attention, but actually the majority of your emissions come from transportation. Next is electricity, and then buildings, and then industry, and then agriculture. And you've got a sizable chunk of emissions that come from agriculture, which is pretty unusual compared to other states, but given the kind of verdantness of this place, not surprising. The next slide, just highlighting some of the extreme weather impacts that you're already seeing. Obviously, extreme heat, wildfires, drought, and water cycle changes. When we did the energy modeling for the state, it was surprising to see, oh, you're actually seeing a significant amount of drop in the amount of power that you can produce from your hydroelectric dams because there's just not enough water there. So obviously these are big challenges. They impact everyone, but especially hard for workers and for vulnerable communities, and they impact every sector of your economy. That's the thing, is it ripples out into every other part of the economy too. Okay, next slide. So then I'm going to finish just by highlighting a few of the ways that we're thinking about how you could advance a union climate jobs agenda in Oregon. And again, what we're trying to do here is make sure that we're tackling climate change. We know we need to do that. We're reducing emissions and pollution, that we're protecting, creating a lot of good union jobs in the process, and that we're building a stronger, fairer economy that actually supports working people. So that's what we're trying to do when we put together these ideas and strategies for climate jobs. Next slide. And just a little bit more specific on the purpose of these. Again, I think, we want to make sure that this is a labor-led, right? We're shifting from defense and reactiveness to offense on this. It's a labor-led climate jobs plan that we identify the high impact strategies to do this. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can reduce emissions and you can build out cleaner energy. There's a big difference between, how many jobs are created in putting up, a solar farm versus how many jobs are created in putting up an offshore wind turbine or building a nuclear plant, right? And that's part of what we look at. What is the labor intensity of this stuff, and how do we create the most jobs, and also making sure that we're transitioning to that climate safe economy that we need. And we use the best available data, and research, and do a lot of our own modeling to figure this out. Okay, next slide. And so then when we think about, the kind of key components of Oregon's climate jobs plan, we think about 4 pieces. One is future-proofing Oregon's energy grid and industrial economy. You've got a strong industrial economy. It's energy intensive. We don't want that to go away. We want to figure out how we actually keep that and expand it, but do it in a low carbon way. And then again, you got a bunch of emissions that come from the energy grid, and your energy demand is going up. In the US, we've been lucky. Energy demand has been pretty, stagnant for a couple of decades. That's completely changed. Now we're seeing 1% to 2% growth every single year. And a bunch of folks have mentioned AI and data centers. It's a big part of it, right? We are seeing, significant increases in electricity demand. And we've got to figure out how we meet those demands, but also how we're producing low carbon power to meet those needs. The second one is building healthy and resilient communities, right? A lot of this stuff is about infrastructure and adaptation and resilience, and then protecting Oregon's workers from climate impacts, and then last, leading on climate with equity and high road union careers. So just to say a little bit more about each of those, you can go to the next slide. Future-proofing Oregon's electric grid. That means, that we're dramatically scaling clean energy technologies using union labor to meet that increasing demand that we're seeing. So we want to meet those demands. We also want to make sure that we're delivering affordable power. We know that that's really important to working families right now. We saw that in the last election. And again, that we're creating high quality union jobs. So we've done the modeling. By 2040, Oregon is going to reach 36 gigawatts of clean energy capacity. And we want to make sure that we're mapping out how do you meet that and how do you meet it in a way that's going to create the most union jobs. So that's one piece that we're looking at, and how do we make sure that we have the right labor standards in place to make sure that that work does go union. Streamlining the permitting process with labor representation, that's really important, right? We want to bring folks in early. We want to make sure that we get to build this stuff. We don't want things like right now, right? The IRA tax credits are going to run out soon. Can we build stuff fast enough in the next little bit? And then last, like investing in clean technologies to protect Oregon's key industries and workforces. So we want to make sure that we help the industries and the businesses that you've got here to make the switch to more sustainable methods, especially in manufacturing, where you've got a lot of really good union jobs. Second, building healthy and resilient communities. Your communities are at the center of the climate crisis, and we want to build healthier, more equitable, resilient environment around those communities. And that means, and there's a big opportunity in the public sector and in the public building sector. We want to have low carbon schools, university, housing, public buildings, and we can do retrofitting of these buildings. It's going to save a lot of energy, but it's also a lot of work. It's the most labor intensive part that you can do in kind of making this transition. And it's the place where people are living and learning and working. We also want to electrify medium and heavy duty vehicles. Remember, I said transportation is a big part of your emissions, and we want to make sure that we're supporting union jobs in the manufacturing and maintenance of those as well. And then last, building a pro-worker circular economy. So just a lot of work that can be done in both building and deconstructing and doing renewable waste recovery. We're putting up a lot of solar panels. Those reach end of life and they got a lot of valuable minerals in them. There's a lot of work that can be done to make sure that we're refurbishing them and reusing them and doing it union. And then the third piece here, you can go to the next slide, protecting Oregon's workers from climate impacts. This is about safeguarding workers from climate impacts with strong labor standards. So we're talking about supporting clean agricultural transitions with on-site renewables and enhanced farm worker protections, establishing best-in-class safety standards for forestry and wildfire-related work, and then strengthening labor protections for workers facing direct climate risk. And then last, you can go to the next slide, leading on climate with equity and high road union careers. Again, this is the piece that we think is so important. Okay, what do we have to do on the climate side? What are the strategies that are going to create the most jobs? But then also, what are those standards that we're attaching to make sure that we have the best opportunity to organize and unionize this work? Oregon's already, built the foundation for a worker-centered clean energy transition through the strong labor standards that you've got on clean energy construction and public sector retrofits. Now you can keep leading on that work and prioritize the needs of workers, especially, those that have been historically left behind. And that's creating, infrastructure for these hard-won protections. So we're talking about ensuring all clean energy workers are protected from wage theft, misclassification, unsafe working conditions that harm both workers and responsible contractors. And then the second piece is using public resources to build a union-led clean energy economy. And that guarantees that, taxpayer dollars are supporting good jobs and strong communities. And we're seeing a lot more focus on this now as the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits aren't there, and a lot of that federal funding, I know many of you have been hit hard. Money that was supposed to be there for projects has disappeared. And so figuring out how do we have those resources at the state level to keep investing, to keep moving these projects forward, and keep making sure that we're making this transition with good union jobs. And then last slide, I think here, you can go to the next slide. So I just want to end by saying, you all have a lot to be proud of. You got a really strong labor movement. You've got strong labor standards on a lot of aspects of work that you're engaged in. And I think especially in this political moment, there's this really tremendous opportunity for the Oregon labor movement to lead on climate issues. It's just so important. We've got to take on this challenge. We've got to make sure we're avoiding the worst impacts of it. And we've got to use this opportunity to build a clean energy economy that is fairer, that's more equitable, and it's union. That's where we want to get. So I want to say a big thanks to the Cornell Climate Jobs Institute team who have worked so hard on Oregon, all of the folks that I work on. Raina Cohen is here, who's been leading our project work in Oregon. And you can see we've got a whole bunch of other people on our team who've been really engaged in this work. And also Ron Ruggiero is here from the Climate Jobs National Resource Center and has been working closely with us as well as we figure out how to build this union climate jobs plan in Oregon. So big thanks to all of those folks. And most importantly, a big thanks to you all, because we really appreciate the opportunity to work with you and have a part in you figuring out what is the labor vision and plan to take on this issue, to take on inequality, and make sure that you're building a fair and union clean energy economy. So thank you. Okay, so now with that kind of background on what we're